In describing the cycle of abuse central to religious trauma syndrome among fundamentalist Christianity, noting that other authoritarian religions have equally toxic doctrines, author and psychologist Marlene Winnell writes, "The doctrines of original sin and eternal damnation cause the most psychological distress by creating the ultimate double bind. You are guilty and responsible and face eternal punishment, yet you have no ability to do anything about it. You must conform to a mental test of believing in an external, unseen source for salvation and maintain this state of belief all the way until death. You cannot ever stop sinning altogether, so you must continue to confess and be forgiven, hoping that you have met the criteria despite complete lack of feedback about whether you will actually make it to heaven. Salvation is not a free gift after all. For the sincere believer, this results in an unending cycle of shame and relief." However you feel today about the religion that you were born into, whether you believe, have ever believed, or were told that you must believe, I want to say there is healing on the other side. I'm Christy Powell, and this is Talk Heathen, so let's talk about it at 512-991-9242, because the show is coming right now. All right, I'm not going to do the big loud shout with my voice on its way out today, but I do want to say welcome to everyone. Today is June 16th, 2024. I am your host, Christy Powell, and joining me today is Jamie Forbes, the Blind Limey.
Hey, man. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to celebrate Father's Day with you. Here we are in the middle of Pride Month, and we've got, I guess, religious trauma on the mind right now. I think there's a lot of family stuff, a lot of big stuff to get into.
Yeah, and I'm happy to be co-hosting with you, Chrissy, because it's always nice to have someone who, if an uppity caller calls in and is unruly, not only can you tell them where to stick it, but you can give them the psychosocial fallout backed by papers on what will happen when they stick it.
Yeah, when to stick it, how to stick it, how to heal from the sticking
it. Why to stick it?
Well, we're here for all kinds of conversations, not just a stick it to theists, but you know what? Let's have the conversations. Let's get the calls that we get. We definitely want to hear from you. Talk Heathen is a product of the atheist community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. We're a live call-in show, and we have open lines. So get your calls in. Again, we're at 512-991-9242 or from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. And that is all of it. That's the announcements for now. Let's get on to the question of the week, our Talk Heathen to Me segment, where we get into last week's question. Last week, we asked you, name an odd reason why someone loses their faith. And here are our top 3 answers. All right, number 3, Surele said an odd reason to lose one's faith is she just walked off. No explanation. They should have dated a Constance instead.
We do like a good pun around these parts.
That took me a moment. Yeah. Number 2 from Joseph Varkey, who says an odd reason for losing faith is so I can masturbate without God watching. Yeah, I don't know if that's entirely how it works. I don't know if that's how any of this works, but that plays for me.
Yeah, I think so. I have thoughts on that for later, but we'll get into that another time.
Sure.
And what's the last one, man?
Yeah, number 1 came from Alan Tenenor, who said an odd reason to lose your faith: going on a hike and seeing a waterfall that does not split into 3. I feel like I understood that reference.
I get that reference. That's a deep cut. I think that the question of the week is very appropriate because every single week is a bit Father's Day because they all come across like dad jokes, which I love.
Let's do it. Our question for this week coming up is, what was God really doing on his day of rest, other than, going out for a pack of cigarettes and never coming back? You can give us your answer below in the video in the comments. Maybe we'll read yours off next week. But Jamie, let me hear from you. What was God really doing on his day of rest?
He was inventing the left turn. Turns out God, big NASCAR fan.
Nice. I appreciate that. And of course, I want to hear from all of our callers. But let's actually go ahead and bring in our producer, Richard Gilliver, now and get his answer. Richard, what was God really doing on his day of rest?
I think God was being lazy, and I think I've got a good scriptural reason to say that I think God was being lazy, because we can say it was his day of rest after working really hard for 6 days. But then, if we look further down the line and we see what actually happens, I think God was just trying to get out of doing the quality checks. And I think, had he done the quality checks on his own work, he wouldn't have had to start again and flood the world.
Yeah, we wouldn't have a waste disposal unit located so close to a recreational area.
Yeah, he opens the complaints
bringing
box.
Secular sexuality back into it at every opportunity.
Yeah, sex therapist gonna sex. But Richard, I wanted to have you here because speaking to both of you before the show about this idea of religious trauma and some of the things we kind of opened the show with, I got the understanding that both of you have maybe more of a secondhand experience of those things and a little bit of a unique experience. Richard, what can you tell me about your experiences with religious trauma?
Yeah, mine is through my wife, who was religious for a long time, and it took her. I think she talked herself out of kind of the religious belief that she had.
Mm-hmm.
And through doing, funnily enough, a master's course in educational psychology. But
that'll do it.
It took a long time, and despite being, I was never a believer in all the time we were married, in all the time we were dating. I've been having these conversations since my mid-teens, long before I first met my wife. So, despite me having these conversations and throughout all that process of us dating and getting married, she was still a believer. And, doing shows like this didn't change her mind.
Mm-hmm.
What changed her mind, I think, what the catalyst was, and it was still a long time. It was still, I think, 6 or 7 years after this catalyst occurred, where she finally came out.
Big paradigm shift. There's a lot to get through before you can admit it to yourself, let alone somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that catalyst was when her mum had passed away, and we went to a church service because she was religious, and I went to services regularly with her. And it was the first service she'd been to since that event of her mum passing away. And the vicar, who knew that her mum had passed away, by the way, in doing this, gave a whole sermon about how your family should be more important than, how God should be more important than your family.
Mm-hmm.
And she came out of that really, really traumatized. And I think that was the initial catalyst that set her on this long journey of coming out.
Yeah, I hear that, and I appreciate sort of the unique perspective that you can take as being on the outside of that. Like, these things definitely affect us, whether we believe or not, whether we've ever believed or not, just because they are in our culture, they're in our communities, in our families, with our marriages oftentimes. Jamie, what can you tell me about your experiences of, I guess, going through religious trauma, but maybe coming out the other side of it and what that's looked like for you?
So, as I alluded to, pardon me for just a second, as I alluded to in the intro, much like Richard may be able to relate to, and a lot of people from England, I wasn't brought up particularly religious. I was nominally Roman Catholic because my grandparents were Roman Catholic, and we went to Anglican school, etc., etc. However, I feel that religion and religiosity and the tenets of religion are almost like radioactive waste. Even if you're not in it, you kind of get hurt by it. You kind of feel the influence on you. Because when I was a young boy, exploring my body for the first time, which, as you know, is completely healthy and normal, I felt a weight of guilt that came from nowhere other than the idea that there was some ethereal judge watching what I was doing and for some reason thought it was wrong. And I just have this very vivid memory of that. So even though I was never directly told, just being around religion and around religious people messed me up in that way.
Sure.
And then I have secondhand stories of people I've known. I had a friend who was a very carefree young chap. Loved nothing more than Bruce Springsteen. He loved the boss. And he was Muslim. And he was at university. And then for some reason, I think it may have been because he was expected to enter into an arranged marriage, he became extremely devout again, entirely through family pressure.
Sure.
And I also had we no longer have had family friends who were Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was made privy to some of the predations that someone we trusted committed, and how the church fathers covered it up and allowed him to do the things he did for far longer than he should have, and hid it from the authorities. And that's why and again, if there are any Jehovah's Witnesses out there and you want to call in, feel free to do so. I will be perfectly civil, but that is a particular sect that I have personal beef with.
Sure, I hear that.
And so, yes, these traumas I've seen in other people, but even experienced it myself just by being in proximity.
Yeah, it's not just like mail and beer on Sundays, you know, it's meaningful being an atheist living in a theistic culture. Even if atheists are becoming more and more of a majority, it's certainly not reflected in our culture and in our rhetoric and in our political policies and statements. And, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm glad that we are here following through on the mission of the ACA to move forward on some of this. So if y'all are ready, let's go ahead and Jamie and I will jump into some calls, and Richard will be seeing you again a little bit later. Yeah.
Yeah. Have a great show, guys.
Thanks, man.
All right. Yeah. Jamie, are you ready to talk to Theodore in Minnesota?
I am.
All right. You're up here at the top of the show, Theodore. You have cutting edge proof of God's existence. Tell me about it.
Oh, so to kind of connect for some reason. That might happen one or two times here, but so
yeah, we're hearing you now. Let's jump into it.
Okay, so my thing's about Genesis. It's the first book of the Bible allegedly written by Moses, who was like in personal contact with God. And I was an atheist most of my life, like until I was 21. And my dad, he's a very smart person. He's very intelligent. He's atheist. He's volunteerist. He's a anarchist, capitalist, information security guy. He drilled atheism into my life, and I turned around and I drilled it into other people's ears. And when I was 21, Christian, they challenged my viewpoints, and I discovered William Lane Craig and his cosmological argument. That's what first started me down the path of atheism. But today, in modern times, I've discovered that it's not only just that God exists, but it's the God of Israel. And how I know it's the God of Israel is because the Bible has parts that couldn't have been known at the time that it was authored.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'm glad that we're getting to the thing. What do you believe and why? I'm getting that you believe in the God of the Bible. Give me your proof.
Okay. So first off, when you look at the Big Bang epochs, that they perfectly mirror Genesis 1. For example, God said, "Let there be light."
Let me hold on real quickly just to understand you better. When you say that the Big Bang mirrors everything we see in Genesis 1, can you tell me a little bit about your understanding of the Big Bang, or rather your credentialing, or how you're getting there? Like, how do you know, or what have you read, and what do you understand about the Big Bang?
There's the 5 epochs of the Big Bang. And they're basically what it is the theory of everything and the grand unified theory breaking into the 4 fundamental forces as the universe expands and cools. And
can you tell me a little bit about your background here?
Major. I honestly am just a hobbyist with this stuff. I just have an extreme interest in theology, physics. I read online a lot, Wikipedia, YouTube. I check the sources, read science articles.
So I do have a question then for you, Theodore. And it's a simple one. I've asked it several times to other people. In the Big Bang cosmological model, what comes first, light or the Earth?
sound. What comes first is wave propagation. Baryonic acoustic oscillations is what they're called.
No,
And,
no,
that's what
light
I was
light
gonna
is
say.
photons. No, Theodore, light is photons. Even a
photon.
I only did senior like
I know,
AP physics,
why,
but I know what
why
light is made of. Okay, and it's photons, and photons came before any of the heavy elements and long before the Earth. So how do you square that? Because in Genesis, God creates the Earth and then says there's light.
Are you just going to talk over me the whole time or what?
Okay, Theodore, let's
hear me?
play nice. The question here is if you're going to say that because the Bible reveals things about the creation of the universe that we couldn't have possibly known, or that the writers of the Bible couldn't have possibly known, shouldn't it also be true that everything that they wrote is accurate if we're going to take them as reliable narrators, as genuine, sincere experts here? So Jamie is just asking you, this appears to be... Theodore, I'm not talking over you. I'm just talking, and then you start. That's the kind of the problem. In the Bible, it says pretty clearly that first came the earth, then came light. Can you explain that? Does that line up with your understanding of our cultural, scientific understanding of the Big Bang?
Yes, I can.
Help me. Okay, do it, please.
Etymology and the word earth. And the word earth has a flexible meaning that's related to matter or land. And it says that earth was formless, and matter comes in multiple forms, solid, liquid, gas. And the only ones that don't have a form are liquid and gas. And it was a Bose-Einstein condensate. And that's why it's described that way.
Okay.
There's more. I have more to that, but you keep cutting me off.
Sure.
I was just acknowledging what you were saying, Chief. I'm not trying to cut you off. I just said, okay.
It does still sound like matter before light, which is a little bit contrary to my comprehension of it. But I think that you have a pretty reasonable point here, Theodore, and I really appreciate your willingness to slow down and explain it to us. Please continue.
Okay, so and then another thing is, so what we know is E equals mc squared. Energy, equals matter times the speed of light and everything like that, which is how, like, force carriers and particles, there's wave particle duality. So all the matter that there ever was comes from these force carriers, such as photons. But before there was even photons, there was wave propagation, baryonic, acoustic oscillations. Literally, it's the Terrence Howard shit, kind of, as far as keys and sound vibrations, etc. God said, "Let there be light." He did literally indicate that there was wave propagation before there was actually photons. And the reason why he says it that way is because he's talking to a guy in the Bronze Age who does not have the benefit of living in the 21st century with science that we have and the terms that we have. So he had to explain it to him in the way that would make sense to him, that now when we recheck it, it still makes sense to us.
I hear that, yeah. And so your contention here is that using a modern scientific language and comprehension of the world, that we can then go back and read English translations of ancient Semitic poetry and be able to develop a coherent, consistent understanding of the creation of the universe, and that ultimately is proof that God is real?
That's one of my proofs, of one of many, and it's for every single day of Genesis that I can prove to you coincides with a portion of evolution. And it's not the English version, it's the Hebrew, because it was written in Hebrew. So you have to compare modern science to what God was speaking to them in Hebrew.
Right, and I appreciate that. I'm just also wanting to acknowledge the many layers of alienation that exist between you and I having this conversation and those words allegedly being written down when they were. The different ways that you and I, as not astrophysicists, may struggle with comprehending some of the science, and the ways that you and I, not as classical linguists, may struggle with understanding the Hebrew. I'm not dismissing anything you say just because neither of us are super qualified to understand all those things, but I do want to just highlight that some of the squish and the ish that can come from our sort of less than academic understanding of some of these principles.
You want to hear a really big one? Is Genesis 2:23 says, "This is the bone of my bone, and this is the flesh of my flesh." And it's Adam talking, and Adam is made of flesh and bone. And he's describing what his flesh and bones are made of in Genesis 2:23. Now, humans have 24 ribs. When you take one away, you have 23 ribs. Humans get 23 chromosomes from each parent, and only the males have the Y chromosome, so that's why it had to be Adam's rib. And if you take DNA and you spell it out, you get DOXY ribonucleic acid. It literally says XY rib in DNA right now.
So that's completely a post hoc rationalization. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's not dioxyrib. It's ribonucleic acid. And
right,
and
but
I'm sorry. I'm going to Theodore. Please let me speak. I feel that you are basically fitting your model into what is extremely vague language. There are still other things that are unexplained. So before any of the earth was created, God separated the waters of heaven from the waters of the earth. Water has a very specific meaning, especially in science. It is H2O. So what is the water that came before the earth?
Can I tell you what that is? The reason
Go ahead.
is because hydrogen is what stars are made of, and hydrogen is the main part of water. Water is 2/3 hydrogen, 1/3 oxygen. Hydrogen comes in 3 isotopes.
Yes, but most of the early stars were comprised of helium that was fusing into hydrogen. Oxygen came much later, and it wasn't liquid water. It's like you wouldn't say a star is made of water. It's made of component things. I really have to say, Theodore, I'm not finding any of this even remotely convincing, because it's basically shoving what we know now into extremely vague language that actually doesn't seem to make much sense to me. You're not selling me on this, dude. I have to be honest.
It's pretty Barnum statement-y, Theodore. The notion here is that this language is so elastic. It's so old and poetic, and there is so much that goes into interpreting and understanding it. Not that your interpretation couldn't potentially be valid or couldn't possibly make sense, or that you won't someday stand in front of some God and he'll be like, yes, you were right. But I have to say that from where we're sitting now, your explanation is as valid as about a billion others that would probably make more sense if we start to really drill down on some of the details.
Mm.
That's just how you feel about it, but also you didn't let me finish about the water being very fundamental to the entire universe. Your mitochondria runs on a proton rotor. There's no body parts in the entire of nature that go in a 360, and cosmic rays are made of hydrogen. The Earth is 2/3 water. Your body is 2/3 water, and it goes all the way down to the quarks being a 2/3 ratio. The moon brings the fucking water here, controls the tides, and controls menstrual cycles. And,
the moon does not control menstrual cycles, Chief. The moon does not have anything to do with menstrual cycles other than that the human body's natural rhythm is around about a month long. That's a coincidence, mate.
Yeah, we're definitely playing with, hey, this number would fit here. Let's see what it looks like if I just stack a whole bunch of these coincidences on top of each other. And I hear you, Theodore. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate your drive to work to understand all of this. And I have to say that the way that you're going about it does seem to be what Jamie was pointing out, that notion of, well, we know this and I believe this. How can I shove those two things together? And it's just not compelling to anybody who wants to look at the information at its face level value and doesn't come in with the assumption that the Bible must also definitely be true.
And there's go on.
Evidently, when you explain God, you're going to be explaining a whole lot of different aspects of the universe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I will perhaps have that conversation someday, and I will face the consequences of that conversation. But right now, I'm trying to have a conversation with you and Jamie in front of a live audience where I've given you the opportunity to compel other people to believe what you believe by explaining it. So the job here is not for me to defend myself to God. The job here is for you to call in and try to convince the thousands of people watching today that your God is the one true God. And I'm just trying to help you do that by pointing out some of the things that are less than compelling about your argument. So if you have anything to add on to that, if you feel like you want to make one last attempt to try and help us understand where you're coming from or why we should all agree with you, please take this time to do that now.
Okay, it says that there was plants on land before there was a firmament, which is true because the ozone layer comes from algae. But you keep talking over me, so you're never going to hear what I think.
Well, that was your space. Thank you so much for trying again. We do appreciate your time. And yeah, I think you'll give us a little bit to read up on and maybe noodle over. And I hope that you will think not about the facts of these pieces, because as important as that is, your approach in understanding them, the philosophy of knowledge, of how you go about connecting these pieces of information, whether you let the science speak for itself or whether you are trying to shoehorn in these various interpretations, is something that I'll invite you to explore on your own. But I do appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for the call, Chief. Again, I mean, what I was going to say, I don't know whether he's still listening or not, but if you go back in some of our previous shows, ones with a friend of the show and host on AXP, Forrest Valkai, he's explained why, even if you take each day as an epoch of the creation of the world, that it doesn't line up with what we know in science. Like the whole when plants came, when animals came, what is an animal or a plant, you know. There are plenty of holes.
Or bats, birds.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And what is a crawling thing and all these kinds of stuff and kinds and all that kind of stuff. And then, again, we're talking about trying to glean scientific truth from a book that also describes things that are, as far as we are aware, impossible, like a global flood or a plague of, like,
talking donkeys.
Yeah, talking donkeys, you know, rivers turning to blood.
Tactical
all this
assault bears.
Yeah. Oh, yes, my favorite.
So when do we know that we are, like, this is actual science that we just didn't have the comprehension for, and what is eventually someday going to be proven scientifically possible? Like, yeah, it does start to get very messy. And for me, the most powerful strategy here for your own peace of mind is to just recognize how easy it is to take other religious belief systems, to take other philosophies and creationist myths and cultural folktales and things, and apply the same sort of, well, if you put this piece together here, if you come at it with that same approach, these sort of Barnum statement philosophies and these old folktales really graft on nicely to almost anything you could want them to.
Yeah, I mean, and with words as vague as those in religious texts, you can make them say anything. But what they mean by earth is this, and what you mean by water is this. And I'm like, really? Why doesn't it say something else than earth and water? Oh, because it was out. Anyway.
Yeah, fair.
I will not go on because it's not fair to Theodore, who was very brave for calling in. We really appreciate it. We don't want to be dismissive. He's not here to talk and defend himself, so I shall say no more. What I will say, though, is I want to hijack the show, because you can send us super chats, you wonderful, wonderful live show viewers, and we will graciously accept them. And as long as it isn't too out of pocket, you can make us say basically anything. And we have had one from Triangle of Stars, €5.99, saying, from watching soccer EM to word salad of cola, greetings from Germany. Auf Wiedersehen.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so before we take our next call, I want to let people know that tomorrow, Monday, 17th of June, our very own Richard Gilliver will be the guest speaker on the Recovering from Religion podcast to talk about why we have a very good reason not to accept the resurrection of Jesus as true. You can listen live on the Atheist Community of Discord or visit recoveringfromreligion.org for more information. Also want to make sure people know about our annual Bat Cruise. It's time for the cruise coming up in August 24th. Forrest Valkai will be there, J. Mike, Secular Rarity, many of the other familiar faces from the ACA will be in attendance. You can get more information or buy your tickets at tiny.cc/batcruise. And while you're at it, this is a great moment to be joining our community. The ACA wants you to join into our community. And for that, we've got an updated website. You can head to www.atheist-community.org, where you can learn more about the organization itself, its policies, different ways to get involved, our membership, and all that good stuff. And then finally, before we take this next call, I want to point people towards tiny.cc/merchaca, where you can get all of your Talk Heathen swag, t-shirts, hoodie, mugs, hats, all kinds of great stuff.
I can absolutely vouch for the baseball caps, because they have a Velcro backing and they really are comfortable.
Adjustable, comfortable hats.
And if you live where we live in Texas in summer, you need a good hat.
Yeah, fair to say. All right. Well, let's talk to Brian in Maryland. Brian, tell us what's on your mind today.
First and foremost, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. You guys are, quote unquote, doing the Lord's work. Hint, hint, wink, wink. I was just listening to that last guy who was talking about 23 and periods, and that was so weird. But I guess what I wanted to put out here is, I know, like, me and my girl were just laughing our asses about it. But for the theists that are listening, just, it's one thing if you believe in something and it inspires you to do good work, that's great.
True.
But it's like, if you really delve into it, like, you'll see the alterations, the editing, the obvious political manipulations, and the fact that the people who receive it, well, they have a hard time doing things like farming, treating women like people, and living past 60. So, like, even if you just do a little bit of digging, you'll find that there's just a ton of inconsistencies. And it just, to me at least, it's like, why don't people see this? And it kind of hurts triple, because I'm black. And it's like, so many black people just believe in Christianity. Then again, it was either with my ancestors, believe in God or we'll murder the crap out of you.
Yeah.
I get it, but it's like, come on, man, let's do better. But anyway, I just want to...
No, I hear it. I think it speaks to some of that Barnum statement idea that we sort of mentioned, that these texts are written so vaguely and so poetically, and we are so alienated from their origins that they do become easy to sort of shoehorn in any other sort of philosophy that you want to put there. And I say any other philosophy, but you're totally right, Brian. I think that the Bible, because of when and where and who by it was written, we see so many things that are very comfortably going to support authoritarianism, that are going to support patriarchal ideals, that are going to support misogyny and rape culture, and a lot of these like meaningful problems in our world today. And so for me, when the like literal inerrant perfectness of the Bible started to fall apart, and I had to start sort of judge these philosophies not on God's divine will, but based on their own merit, it became pretty clear, like you're saying, Brian, that there are so many other better books that we could probably be cribbing from.
And to your point on having faith, but also recognizing that there's errors in these dogma, there are plenty of Bible scholars and religious scholars and theologists who openly recognize the problems with Scripture, the problems with the Bible, or the problems with the Quran and things like that, but still believe in God. And I don't get how they can do that, but I'm not them. So they can, they can square that circle, but they're honest about the book.
I mean, that's relative if you ask me, but also, like, in case like some of the viewers are watching and listening, the Council of Nicaea, it's literally was a top 40 of basically the top 40 sects of Christianity, including the Luciferians, who think that Satan was a good guy, all just literally saying, hey, we could put this story in here, this story. And then it's like also, they also adopted, quote unquote, more like stolen, a bunch of pagan rituals. So it's like, again, if you truly want to believe in it, that's one thing, but just do some digging. And
No, it is so tricky. And I feel like I'm in sort of an awkward place because I want to recognize that the vast majority of Christians don't necessarily believe in biblical inerrancy. But I'm way too autistic for that shit. Like when I was a believer, the Bible had to be perfect. We were evangelicals, and we were very much told that this book is perfect. And when you start to look at the historical origins of that book, what got considered canon and what didn't get considered canon, it's really, really hard to believe that God was completely in control of that process. And so again, if we just sort of take the Bible as a bunch of quote unquote good information and start to evaluate which parts were from God himself and which ones were stuck in by sinful man, you start to get a text that is so mixed and muddled that it really doesn't stand up against damn near any other book on moral philosophy that we might be tempted to grab for.
I know, but hey, man, just wanted to say you guys are doing great work. And to all the listeners out there, yes, there are Black atheists. We're out here. Our numbers are few, but we're strong and we're proud. Don't lose hope. We out here.
Well, Durante,
thank you. Just get that off my chest.
Fantastic, Chief. I really thanks for calling in. And as I was just shouting out Durante from Lamar from last week, singularly excellent gentleman, Black atheist, former pastor. We need more of his ilk.
Yeah. Well said. All right. Well, before my voice cracks again, Jamie, how do you feel about? Oh, let's see. Let me get my call queue freshened up. That's kind of hanging low. Yeah. Tell me about, I suppose, your experiences with some of the notions of biblical inerrancy and how important that really was in sort of your community or the world around you. Was the Bible always seen as sort of like good fairy tales, or was there more of a like literalist, fundamentalist perspective?
Well, I've seen it from both sides, because when we were talking things like Bible stories in school, we really was taught as like, it was never really given a historicity vibe. Like it was always taught almost as allegory. Like we were told that the earth really flooded and Noah really got all the two animals. It was all about, hope and tenacity and staying strong in the face of adversity, talking about things like the Sermon on the Mount, or when the loaves and the fishes, or the nativity, or the resurrection story. It
was always weird for me which things were miracles that definitely happened, and then which things were just sort of allegories, and nobody ever wanted to say definitively this is this and that is that, because then they might offend the other half of the people who believe something opposite.
Yeah, it was always the context I always felt from those teachings was, these are stories of things that may have happened if you believe it, but you don't have to. But maybe that's just the wishy-washy nature of the Anglican Church. I don't know. Sure. On the other hand, I have members of my family who, and again, to tie into the whole religious trauma thing, who believe the Bible is absolutely inerrant, and form quite dangerous, they're not bad people, but quite dangerous outlooks on the world from their interpretations of this book that they believe is completely inerrant and the breathed word of God. So the closer you are, in my mind, and maybe I'm biased, but the closer someone is to believing total inerrancy of the Bible, the more at risk they are, in my mind, of some really quite unpleasant thinking and having to do a lot of mental gymnastics to square a lot of circles. Yeah, no, it can definitely get really messy, and I appreciate why there is so much cognitive dissonance, why people who are in religion go through that cycle of belief and then falling away and all of the shame, and then a recommitment and all of the relief that brings, and how that self-perpetuating cycle can really keep people trapped in a lot of these belief systems. But let's keep going and talk to Andre in Massachusetts. Andre, what do you got for us?
Oh my God! I didn't think I'd get on there so fast. what I wanted to say is, in maybe as a background to preamble, that I was a product of very Catholic upbringing, French Canadians. My sisters, two of my sisters, were in very devastating, just monsters. And yet they could not, in our church, ever consider separating themselves from these guys. Mm-hmm. And I was a product of 15 years of parochial education. The last 3 of those years was in the seminary to become a priest in this religion. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't do it. Growing up, I graduated in '64, and the war was going on. I mean, that was heavy on you, man. That was heavy on you. The 18 years old, you could be 18 years old, and 2 months basic training, 2 months advanced infantry training, and in the 5th month, 5 months, you're 18 years old, and now you're in Vietnam fighting for your life.
Yeah, I hear you.
When I got there, I was already the old man. I was 23. I was 23, and I was giving, they made me an NCO, a sergeant, because I was a smart Yankee. I knew things. And, okay, you're going to...
How did those experiences inform your relationship with God, whatever that means for you here?
Yeah, I know. I went to the chaplain, you know. I could see out of my wire, there was a little church. It was like maybe, I don't know, 200 or 300 meters away. Just a little church out there. And I went one day to that church, and there was this little Vietnamese priest who spoke a very beautiful French. Oh, he spoke a very beautiful Parisian French. Yeah, this priest. And I appealed to him, Father, go away from this place. They're going to kill you. He says, no, I can't leave my flock. So I asked, you know, why is God doing this? You know, you're telling me He knows everything. He can do anything. And here we are. Why are we doing this?
So you're reflecting a lot of sentiments. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Chief, but you are reflecting a lot of sentiments that we've heard from people, and you've obviously gone through a lot. I mean, I can only imagine. I can't even imagine the kind of stresses that you would have been under in that situation. And there's so much wrong with that picture. Of course, you know, you've been brought up to believe that there's a just and loving God, and then you're thrown into the literal hell of war. And even the fact that there's a Catholic church with a French-speaking priest in Vietnam, both are artifacts of empire. It's all just so wrong. And so even the story of, like, I was going into the seminary, and then I found out what God was really like, and I couldn't do it anymore. That's a perhaps unsurprisingly common story we hear. So thank you for sharing all of that. We want to make sure that you've been heard, and that these stories are valuable, and there may be other people out there that have gone through something similar or can relate to having lost their faith in such a shocking way. So, I mean, how have you felt like you're able to move forward?
I wanted to be able to say to younger people that I never thought I'd get to be this old. That I'm 78 years old. I didn't think I'd get to be that old, because a lot of those young men didn't get to be more than 18 and 19 years old. And I try to hold on to I was given a very good man, a Sergeant Stanley Burke from Cambridge, Massachusetts, who entered the Army 1 month after Pearl Harbor. He entered the Army, and it was something new. It was called Airborne, and he made that jump in D-Day 80 years ago. He fought that war. He fought in Korea, and this was his 3rd war. Imagine that. 3 times he went to war.
What a life.
And he gave, I didn't know shit from nothing. I didn't know. I was so afraid all the time. I was so afraid that, oh my God, something bad could happen to you at any moment, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they say no atheist in foxholes, and I appreciate why people might feel as if in those moments of desperation, they are needing to turn towards some sort of answer. But, you know, as you're pointing out, Andre, those moments, those situations of war might be dire, and they might break down our psychological defense mechanisms in a great number of ways and sort of damage our immunity towards irrationality. But they don't really answer the questions. They don't really bring any meaningful solutions to those places.
What? How are you going to hold on to that? I mean, you're telling me this guy that's looking down and knows everything and can do anything, and yet this is going to go on. This is key.
Yeah. And the answers we tend to get are these thought-stopping cliches about how God works in mysterious ways, about how God has a plan, about how we are these simple lice who couldn't possibly comprehend the will of God. And, you know, thanks for playing, but those solutions don't mean anything to me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry I didn't get your name.
Yeah, so my name is Christy. You're on with me and Jamie the Blind Limey, and we really appreciate you giving us a call and sharing some of these experiences with us.
Yeah. Oh man, I hit the jackpot. I hit the fucking jackpot.
Well, thank you for sharing those memories that are obviously very, very painful. But like the problem of evil, like why is God?
I gotta tell it to somebody to get it off my chest. That it just hurt so much, especially when we came home, and the people that we were really trying to protect spit on us and called us names.
I hear that. Yeah,
if those experiences are still running up against your ability to sort of center yourself, there's things like the Secular Therapy Project, and there are people out there that are better qualified than us to help.
We've begun talking about trauma a little bit today, Andre, and I appreciate that this is a deeply held trauma that you've been carrying for a long time. And I don't want to say that any form of medicine or any sort of mental health or medical practice will fix that, but I will say that it's not broken in the first place. It sounds like a pain that you have carried for a long time and that you are seeking some relief from. So I'm glad that you felt comfortable sort of unburdening and talking with us today. And I would really encourage you to find some opportunity to share some of these stories, to find a little bit of relief and a little bit of support in working through some of these past traumas. I don't want to oversimplify or overgeneralize, but I do want to just say that the shame and the guilt and the pain of this type of trauma are things that don't often stand up very well to the light of day. If you get a little bit of fresh air on them, if you bring them out into the open and allow other people to see them and validate some of these feelings, oftentimes you'll gain a fair bit of control and relief from them.
Well, I've seen lately, because I pointed out to people that I've researched some of this, and I know as a fact that right now, as we're speaking, the United States has a treaty agreement with Vietnam. They are not.
Oh, I think we may have lost him.
Lost Andre's connection. I'm curious where that was going, but I do appreciate his deeply felt sentiment around some of these like really truly meaningful issues.
Yeah.
I don't again want to overgeneralize or make comments about Andre without him being here, but I do want to recognize that the veterans of that war, frankly, the veterans of all American wars, are deeply underserved in the mental health population. We can talk all day about the failings of the VA and of our culture and a great number of other things, but I do just want to stress that regardless of the war or spiritual warfare or whatever other form of trauma you may have experienced in your life, there are meaningful steps towards health and healing that are available to you. I know that's not a simple and easy road. I know that access to mental health care is greatly limited for the vast majority of us. And I still sincerely believe everything that I'm saying. So if anybody has been waiting around for the opportunity to find support, I hope that this statement is just one more push in the right direction. But with that, are you ready to talk to Jacob in Tennessee?
Yeah, let's give it another go.
Yeah, for sure. Jacob, tell us what's on your mind today.
So I was just calling to talk about trans kids in religious schools. In the U.S., religious schools, my wife and I are religious. I guess I'm more of an agnostic religious person.
Sure.
She's more of a non-agnostic religious person. And so we've got our kid in a private religious school, and she's been talking about kind of some like the underground trans kids in the school, and I'm kind of it's kind of a sensitive topic, and I'm not really sure. I don't know. I'm just curious to get your advice on this. I don't really know. I don't know if it would be the best for them to come out, because I'm sure as a private school, I really need to go through the handbook. I probably should have went through their whole rule before calling, but I kind of called on a whim. But I would imagine that they probably can get punished or even kicked out for something like that.
It's vile to say, but I think that it's likely very true, without knowing the particulars, that this could be a matter of expulsion because of this part of their identity. As far as like whether or not they should come out of the closet, I'll say very broadly, that is always a question that everybody should only ever make for themselves. And they're never going to make, quote, the right one, because there is no perfect or right decision. Staying in the closet causes demonstrable harm. And we know that leaving a sort of double life secret identity style experience can be deeply damaging to our psyches in ways that stay with us for the rest of our lives. But so can being kicked out of your community and ridiculed and challenged on your identity, particularly when you are only a teenager and you're beginning to form that identity in the first place. Our teenagers, our adolescents, our kiddos really need to have the opportunity to try on different outfits, to try on different music genres, to try on different personalities. We want to encourage them to be, quote, true to themselves, but also give them a fair range of flexibility to try on different hats and see what themselves really is. And all I can say from personal experience, Jacob, is that having grown up in a school very much like that, not as a trans person, but as somebody who is clearly not all the way cis, who clearly has some gender fluidity and some bisexuality, it was very challenging. And I certainly witnessed other people who had identities that were much more outside of the prescribed notions who struggled greatly. And I did know people who were kicked out of school because it came out that they were gay, or because it came out that they were exploring these other possibilities in themselves. And for many of them, I think that actually worked out really well in the sense that it got them out of that shit community. But this is something that every person is going to have to sort for themselves. And my only hope would be that the children you're talking to have good support. You know,
And
I worry about parents that are sending them to a private school that will kick them out for this part of their identity, but I hope that they have other people around them. Jamie, please.
yeah, I was just going to piggyback on that. And if you want to do something proactive, you want to be at least subtly proactive. I'm assuming that you don't have any problems with children being trans, and you understand that it's perfectly fine. Just make sure that your home and your area is a safe space, and you're a person who can be trusted, and that your kid knows that. And if they have any friends who are experiencing that they know that if they ever come over to your house, that they can be themselves in safety. You're not going to tell on them. You're not going to judge them. Because sometimes all it needs is one person, one grown-up, one person who feels an authority or guardianship figure to actually go, I get you. You're not wrong. You're not broken. I understand there's a lot of people who would say that to you, and that you may have to keep it a secret from some people, but that's okay. You're safe with me.
Yeah, the schools around my area are, and it's, more along my wife, she really pushed for it hardcore. And, so I went ahead and let her go to the religious school. They do have better education than the schools we have in the area. Yeah, so that's kind of where my thinking was headed.
We live in a culture that really sees religion as benign. People who aren't meaningfully religious still tend to sort of frame, well, how bad could a couple of Christmas carols be? What's so wrong with closing your eyes during a prayer? And, in a multicultural society, I do appreciate that notion, but I think that we often underestimate the damage that can be done in these schools. Jacob, again, I don't mean at all to be referring to the specific school that you were talking about, but I will say that oftentimes Christian schools are put forward as private and a superior college prep type education when they lack the necessary certifications and accreditations to really back that up. It is sort of endemic to that school system to always be just one step away from this particular accreditation in a way that can really confound parents. And oftentimes the education is not particularly top shelf. Now, there's a broader conversation to be had about the way we fund education in this country writ large, but that might be a little bit beyond the scope of all this.
Yeah, we searched a couple schools. And there was one school that was Pentecostal, and I don't know. I think it's the right term. And they were known for speaking in tongues.
Yeah,
it's like that's a little wacky for me. Let's not go there. Which I think that's the right term. Pentecostal, is that correct?
I mean, likely, yeah. I don't want to assume,
tongues,
but yes, that would be a thing for sure. And it is always interesting how we all have our own sort of personal, private Overton windows of just how much ridiculous religiousness we're willing to accept. Like, this old hymn that is about, drinking Jesus's blood. Well, it's an old hymn. It's from a different time. Like, maybe I'll let that go. Or, so many things that if you were to really take a step back, you'd be like, whoa, that sounds like total madness.
Yeah, it does. Catholicism is definitely an odd one too. The one that we found is non-denominational, and they're kind of they're pretty benign. As far as religious schools go, they kind of focus on the education and a little bit of Bible teaching. That's about it. Nothing crazy.
I only want to speak from my own experience here and from the experience of people that I've worked with, but I would just maybe encourage you to keep a close eye there.
Yeah,
I don't want to disagree with you, Jacob, but I know that my parents probably would have said the exact same thing about the school that I was going to in a great number of ways. The non-denominational, it's not that wild, it's blah, 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 blah. And I say with adult eyes that there were deeply, deeply problematic philosophies in that system. And those problems seem to be existent in a number of other small Christian schools similar to the one that I went to. So if it's a good school, it's a good school. If it's the best place for your kids, it's the best place for your kids. I would just really encourage you to be thoughtful about whether or not it is sincerely a good education and whether or not these philosophies truly are benign, especially if we are sitting here having a conversation about whether or not a child will be excommunicated from the culture that she exists in because of their identity.
Yeah.
That feels like maybe not a great or benign place to be.
Yeah, it's not necessarily her. It's, she's been talking about some friends.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm referring to. Just to say, if I watched my friend at a young age be kicked out of our culture and society because of an immutable aspect of their identity that they were just in the exploratory phases of beginning to understand and may not even meaningfully connect to, that would probably send shockwaves through my psyche that would impact the way I see trans people, the way I see people outside of my religious community, the way I see my religious community. The ripples of that can be deeply traumatic. I don't know the particulars here, and I don't want to portend terrible things for your child, but I want to recognize that nothing you're describing comes across to me as benign.
Yeah, I think lead by example. Ensure that whatever they're saying at school to your child, you make sure that she knows that these people are people. They're top. That their lives are valid, and that they shouldn't face the persecution that they may stare down. And just to reiterate, if you can be a haven, an oasis of some kind, or at least make it known that they can be themselves around you and be a source of trust, that can go a long way to helping these kids be safer.
Yeah, she's 17 now, so she's a junior, and she's had friends over the years, kind of come around, and the only thing that this kind of has to be talked about whenever you talk about this. I feel like, rebellion is kind of an inherent part of being a kid, right? That's kids rebel. That's just, I believe,
Sure.
Inherently true. And not all kids, but a population of kids, you're gonna have some kids rebel. And she's had two friends who have have became trans for a certain period of time, and now they've kind of went back to being cis, and as a father, and just this is a huge topic in our society right now. It's exploded over the past 5 to 10 years. I mean, think about don't ask, don't tell. That was what, 10 years ago? I mean, you couldn't even be gay in the military. So this topic in general has exploded. And, the only thing that, calling to talk about this, I have to talk about my concerns about that, about everything around it, right? This is a good place to do that. And, the one thing, I could totally see one of her friends, rebelling a little bit like they did, going the trans route, and the parents, instead of being just a safe place for it, lean into it and take her to doctors and go the whole 9 yards and do that.
So I hear you, and I wanted to let your narrative go for a little bit, but I have to jump in and really talk about this notion of a trans identity exploration as a form of rebellion. Yes, it is natural for teenagers to be exploring their identity. And like I pointed out, trying on new hats, trying on different things and seeing what fits. And yeah, for a good portion of us, that's going to lead to punk rock. That's going to lead to, these overt forms of, quote, rebellion, sticking it to the man, being the opposite of whatever our parents are. And there are a lot of different forms that can take. And there is no doubt in my mind that there is some non-zero percentage of teenagers who have flirted with the idea of, I'll be the thing that I know my parents hate, and have, for that reason and that reason only, donned some sort of other sex dress and appearance and expression. And sure, maybe that exists a little bit. But Jacob, this notion that kids are doing this to piss off their parents really marginalizes the incredible number of actual trans people that really do exist and that actually were teenagers trying to explore their identity.
And if it's a contradiction,
people,
sorry.
Or cis people who don't know for sure that they are cis. And if you've never asked the question, if you've never been willing to explore your identity or try a different genre of music or try a different type of food, how do you know that you don't like it? How do you know that it doesn't fit you? Jacob, you're really acting as if the notion of being transgender is a choice that someone is making, and potentially for quote unquote the wrong reasons, out of spite. And I would just push back against all of that. We understand that trans identities exist, and then people's ability to understand, accept, access, or express those identities is really the only place where choice comes into it.
Yeah, and it's a contradiction in terms. Wow. Let me just say this, Jacob. The scenario you painted of a child through rebellion, going down the route of being transgender, and then their parents accepting it and taking them to doctors and stuff. It's not a rebellion anymore if the parents accept it. They're not rebelling against their parents anymore. So if it was done just out of rebellion and spite, they'd stop. It's not the kind of thing you would continue just because, I've started, I may as well finish. No, I think you might want to reevaluate your knowledge about what being transgender is.
Well, the one that one case in particular, they were rebelling against the father, and it was the mother who was taken to the doctor.
You've got to trust the doctor. Like, a doctor's not just going to take a kid's word for it. There are robust systems in place that are sometimes stymied by the powers that be to properly evaluate. It's not, it is medical science. It's not just, you say you were born as a boy and now you say as a girl. Cool, bring the drugs and surgeries. It's like, no, it's a far more involved and far more precise system of medical interventions than that.
The way it was painted to me from my daughter, and I don't know if she's embellishing a little bit, was that it was self-reporting. And
there's only so far you'll get with that.
What I've heard from her.
Yeah, it's more complex than quote self-reporting. We are talking about a significant. I mean, I should say we're being very broad when we talk about going to doctors. That's a super vague statement. Just to get this out there, because it's such a persistent, ridiculous rumor, there is basically no case in which teenagers are receiving any type of gender affirming surgeries. That is a basically non-existent practice. It's now been outlawed unnecessarily in a great number of states. It seems to be this big boogeyman that we keep bringing up, but just to say it's not happening, it's not anything that anybody's asking for to happen. Let's really put that aside for now. If we are considering the possibility of hormone blockers and hormone replacement therapies, usually in that order, at this age, we are still talking about relatively inobtrusive interventions that are not entered into lightly, that are definitely entered into gradually, that have a lot of support in their efficacy, and that are not being done willy-nilly because a quote rebellious teenager just decided to stick it to their dad.
Yeah, and not to even mention the difficulty of getting into that kind of care and the cost, of course. Let us not forget the cost. So it's not something people just do on a whim.
No, I think it's done through the act of rebellion. Typically, at least in my experience, anecdotally, that's what.
We couldn't agree less, I'm afraid, Jacob. You've kind of lost us there,
how do you account for the actual experiences of real trans people? How do you account for the remarkably low number of what I'm going to call trans regret, where people actually do fill out surveys or file other reports and express that they regret some of the interventions that they participated in? That number is is remarkably low. And to hear your story, Jacob, it's like you are sitting on the sidelines of this other person's experience, reporting on it like it's a very like casual day at the beach.
Well, no, I mean, this is something I've been following for years, and I've tried to understand it and talk to a lot of people. I actually talked to a couple of detransitioners, and I believe from talking to them that the reason it's underreported is because they're ostracized from the community. There's an article published, I believe, I forget what publication, but it was like some academic source, and they were saying that this is becoming such a huge deal, and we have to discuss it now. We can't sweep it under the rug. It's not a small issue. It has to be talked about. I wish I could. I wish I didn't realize that I'd get here in this conversation. Or
no, that's fair, and I don't want to be dismissive, but I do have to say that regardless of some unnamed academic source, I want to say very plainly that the dearth of literature would overwhelmingly say that detransition is valid and incredibly rare. Nevertheless, it is still true that we have to provide a way forward for actual trans people, and a religious school system that would push somebody out because of a trans identity is going to be a meaningful deterrent to offering support to both actual quote unquote trans people and so-called rebellious teenagers who are just trying to stick it to dad. We need to have an opportunity for these children to explore their identity in a safe and comfortable environment, and potentially to receive the medical care that they sincerely need.
Yeah, I am very much not on board with making legitimate, scientifically backed medical care unavailable to people because a very small number of them end up regretting it. If that was the case, we wouldn't treat anyone for cancer, because there's a lot of people out there who regret getting cancer treatment because of the side effects and problems that come with it, and it wasn't as effective as they'd hoped. Far more people regret that than people who go through gender affirming care of one form or another, and I can tell you that for a fact. And we don't go, oh, well, we're not going to give you chemo because, oh, you might regret it in the future. And we go, no, here's the risks. Here's what may happen. But here's what we believe the benefits are. And I believe that gender-affirming care, be it social transition, hormones, or eventually surgery, should have the same auspices. It should be done as a neutral scientific endeavor with the best interests of the patient and only the patient in mind.
Sure. That's a heck of an analogy, though.
It fits. We don't withhold medical care that may have a risk of negative outcomes for certain patients if the overall benefits would outweigh them, and the puritanical hand-wringing around gender and gender care. It is a sore spot for me, because it's taking something that this is medicine. It's medicine. It is medical care, and treating it with a completely different ethical outlook than basically every other part of medicine entirely. And I just cannot get on board with that.
Yeah, Jacob, I don't want to straw man you. Do you take umbrage with the notion that being transgender and unable to access gender affirming care is somehow less significant, less important than being having a cancer diagnosis and being unable to access cancer care?
I think those are two completely different things.
Why do you take umbrage with that? What makes them completely different? I mean, obviously it's a metaphor, so I get that they're not the same, but why is it not a fitting metaphor?
Because one is potentially, we know, leads to death. Almost.
Yes, lack of access to gender affirming care absolutely does lead to death in trans youth. That statistic is overwhelmingly powerful. What were you going to say about cancer?
Well, basically, that if untreated, in almost all cases, you'll die from it. I might be behind on the studies, but because my daughter was talking about this recently, I was looking at some, and my understanding is it's about half and half. That transitioning doesn't necessarily cause a reduction in suicide rates.
That's demonstrably untrue. We're live on air, and I definitely don't want to be sitting here trying to Google a bunch of statistics that I don't have memorized. And so I want to be really mindful of our desire to have a well-evidenced conversation. And I just want to say that if you scratch the surface on that even a little bit, you'll see that the notion that 50% of all people are, quote, detransitioning is just total pseudoscience bunk. It's a popular propagandist myth,
no, that's not
if I can go that far.
No, that's not. You misunderstood me. That 50% that if you transition, that it's still a 50-50 shot. Like it doesn't help you. Like if you transition, it doesn't help the suicide rate.
Tell you what, Jacob.
Also untrue.
If you have these actual studies, send them to the email address tv@atheist-community.org, and we will get them. It will be forwarded on to Christy and I promise if we receive them, I will take a look at them. I give you my solemn promise that if you can find those studies and you send them to that email address, they will find their way to me and I will read them.
The good ones we'll address on air. The less good ones, I at least always make sure to mention on my blog or in one of the ACA fan groups. So sincerely, we will respond to you directly. And if there's any way to have a public conversation where we can eat crow if need be, we will follow through on that.
Yeah, and and the reason I want to talk about this is because, like I said, I got my daughter. She got these friends that are going through this. And two of them have decided they actually started hormone therapy and they discontinued it, and they're no longer pursuing being trans. And so
that's the hat trying on process that I mentioned earlier. That is a important thing for people to be able to do, to have the opportunity to explore their identity, to explore their medical options under the care of a proper provider. Obviously, you're working in a system where there is a lot of social pressure against the notion of a trans identity. And so that is going to put its thumb on the scale in some ways. But I don't have any problem with the notion of a cis child believing that perhaps they are trans and exploring that identity. And if that does eventually lead them to trying hormone blockers or even hormone replacement therapies and these different things, and then after a period of time deciding, you know what, I don't like the way this makes me feel. I don't like the idea that this is the real me. I actually miss the way that I was. And they decide to reverse course, of course I'm going to support them. But this notion that there is some sort of epidemic of children being operated on in these irreversible ways that will cause lifelong traumas is just a boogeyman that I can't see in any of the meaningful literature.
What if these teenagers had found the treatment and it would have been puberty blockers?
That's reversible. You stop the puberty blockers, puberty happens.
Oh, really? So if you take puberty blockers for years, and
you only take it for as long as is necessary to fully understand the situation. As soon as you take them away, then puberty ensues. Like, people don't keep taking puberty blockers forever. Like, there will come a point where they will have to make a decision as to whether they are happy and wish to continue their transition journey, or they wish to stop. And that will be an informed decision made between them and their doctors, and with professional guidance, using proper, scientifically backed procedures. It is not a shot in the dark. It is not guesswork, and it is not going to pander to people's vanity either. It is going to be done above board, ship-shape Bristol fashion. And as Christy said, I think you're drawing up boogeymen and allowing them for you to hold on to maybe some kind of disquiet with the idea of transitioning as a concept. I don't know. Again, I don't want to strawman you, but I would encourage you to look into it further.
No, I will. My understanding was that basically you took puberty blockers for the period that you'd be going through puberty, and then after that, if you can come off them and you won't go through puberty. I might be off. Maybe there's like a year or two where you.
I mean, anybody who is taking puberty blockers is going to be taking them at the point that their doctor prescribes them, and stop taking them at the point that their doctor stops prescribing them, in a negotiated dialogue about what is best for the patient. Yes, puberty blockers are reversible in a sense. I mean, anytime we're talking about medicine,
Really?
anything you put into your body is going to change you. Eating a chili dog is something that is quote unquote not reversible, but it's also not going to have long-term meaningful damage. And depending on the case, depending on the length, depending on so many particulars that I think it would be problematic for us to overly discuss in the abstract, I do still want to say that puberty blockers are not permanent. And it's one of the reasons that it's the intervention that we use in particular with adolescents, because we want to give them the opportunity to halt certain forms of puberty if it's causing distress, and still provide them with the opportunity to potentially go on their biological continuous growth process as is written in their DNA, or possibly to intervene with hormone replacement therapies and other strategies.
And here's the crazy
so much
thing.
as anything is reversible, it's reversible. Yeah.
And here's the crazy thing about a lot of those quote unquote puberty blockers and hormone therapies. They're not just used for trans people. They're used in cancer treatment. They're used for a lot of other stuff too. That's just my 2 cents.
So there is no gendered switch that a doctor is flipping irreversibly.
Oh, I'll have to dig into that a little bit more. And, the reason I wanted to talk about this too is because it's like you can't talk about this without getting demonized. Like I'm in your chat. I'm looking in your chat. I've got a 17-year-old daughter who's dealing with this stuff on a daily basis, and I have concerns. And I'm her dad, and of course it's going to be men my age or women my age who are going to be concerned about this stuff. Yet the entire chat is demonizing me for questioning things and making.
Yeah. I hear you.
It's so odd to me. Like,
I appreciate that. I appreciate why you would feel alienated, and I'm not going to sit here and talk shit about you. I appreciate that you are asking these questions, and I don't want to necessarily speak on behalf of the chat. But if I may, if you're bringing this issue forward, I want to suggest that a lot of that pushback isn't because you are coming in just asking questions. It's because you're coming in asking questions already existing in a framework that we know certain things about. We know that you are in a culture where you think it is likely that a child would be kicked out of that community because they are transgender. That is something that the chat, that a thinking person, I would hope, would have some sort of moral complication around. You are coming to this expressing the notion that teenage rebellion is a major component here, instead of recognizing that there is legitimate identity exploration among teenagers, and some of that may be in direct oppositional conflict with their parents. So your framework is really damning in a lot of ways, and that's before we start to get into some of the misapprehensions you may have around, the notion of gender-affirming care and the experiences of people detransitioning and some of those other facts that we disagree with. Just your central sort of approach to this question brings into it some assumptions that I think is going to bump up against the moral philosophy of some of the people who are maybe pushing back in the chat. Is that too strong for me to come across as?
And I'll just add, I understand the irony. Yeah, you're coming at this as a concern as a parent, and you want to do the best. And ironically, you feel like you're being demonized for wanting to do good. And I just want you to understand that we kind of understand that. We may not agree with some of your ideas, but where you're coming from is not a bad place.
And I didn't say anything about illegitimizing trans kids whatsoever. I'm just saying that, from through my experience, that the 2 trans children I know got into being trans because of rebellion. And
I mean, even that language, Jacob, like I don't want to be pedantic, but if you are trying to understand why there is pushback, let me explain it this way. You were referring to these people as trans children and then saying that they got into that because they wanted to push back against their parents. Well, if they eventually came to the conclusion that they are not trans, then they're not trans children. They are cis children. If we are referring to them as children who identified as trans and who are playing around with that identity, who then later changed, sure, but let's not use the notion of them being rebellious towards their parents as an explanation for how they got into a trans identity if you're now saying that they don't have a trans identity. This type of language, this way of approaching the conversation dismisses the fact that there are people who do have trans identities and who do express that, not because they just decided to, but because that's who they were. And so when your language sort of frames it in that way, it is going to create the sense that you don't believe in the legitimacy of trans identities. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to explain why what you're saying very much comes across that way to any reasonable listener. Jamie, am I wrong? Is that not a reasonable interpretation?
It's how I'm feeling too. As I say, we want to talk about your ideas rather than the person. We don't want to ad hominem. But I'm completely on board with Christy. And I'm also, I keep on thinking, yes, these two kids were supported. Let's hope they were supported by their parents if they were going and starting that journey. But I'd like to think, why did they end that journey? Was it by their own volition, or did they feel pressured by their peers and their peers' parents and their teachers and the society at large? Like, you don't know why they stopped. You also don't really know why they started. You've heard secondhand why. But again, these stories are more nuanced than hearsay, and I would urge you maybe to seek out some actual trans people and talk to them about their journey. That might be fun, and look into that rather than just taking this sample size of two. And sorry, go ahead.
I mean, that's her personal friends.
Sure.
There's other trans people that I know that are adults, but maybe I should have started out with, I'm not delegitimizing, trans children in any way, but this is my experience, and proceeded from there. But that's where I should have started. And maybe I am catastrophizing a little bit. But I try and read on both sides, and I know, I was reading some story about Jazz, that the transgender female from the TLC show, and I can't imagine the pressure put on her because of the show and everything to do what she needed to do for the show, to do everything that she needed to do to become trans, have all the surgeries and stuff like that. And and I'll be completely honest, I feel like, it's flipping a little bit, because I've got a brother who has children in public school, and it's kind of the opposite there, where it's kind of the new cool thing to get into.
Please, Jacob,
Yeah.
no, that kind of rhetoric is
really
upsetting.
damaging.
No.
We're getting pretty far afield on a really long, but I think very important call. And Jacob, before I let you go, I just want to take a moment to really clarify something that I think is meaningfully important and fundamental to some of our different uses of language and complications here, which is that a person is either born with a trans identity or they are not. Somebody either is trans or they are not. And sure, because we're talking about humans, when you divide them into two categories like that, it does get really messy. But the truth of the matter is, nobody decides to be trans. They don't need to take any medications to become trans. They don't need to have surgeries because they are trans or in order to become trans. They simply are trans, and some of these medical interventions can be a way to affirm that experience and to make the experience of being trans feel better in really complicated and challenging ways to describe. But again, no one is choosing to become or not become trans. Someone simply is or is not. And some of these different medical interventions are to support that decision of how they express themselves. So if you will maybe sit with that notion, I think a lot of these other things may come into relief.
Of the kids who were trans at one point and then not trans at another point.
No, they were never. If they stopped, they were never trans. And if they are trans and have stopped, they've been made to stop.
Now, there is the possibility of somebody exploring an identity and discovering that it is not theirs, and that is valid. That is a necessary part of adolescence. It's also true, like Jamie said, that there are people who were exploring their identity, found that it was theirs, and then backed off of it because of the incredible social pressure, like, for instance, being kicked out of your school because of that identity. As a person myself who is perhaps pansexual, when I was in a high school where it was completely not okay to be gay, I exclusively showed attraction to women. And there were a lot of potential loves and relationships that I denied myself. I even denied admitting that I had a desire for myself. And perhaps there are plenty of trans kids who are willing to go stealth, who are willing to maintain the illusion of a cisgendered identity because of those sorts of pressures. There are so many different possibilities that I don't want to sit here and try and diagnose the two children that you're referring to. But fundamentally, when we have these discussions, we recognize that people are trans or they are not trans. They are not deciding to become trans, and they do not need any sort of medical intervention in order to be trans. They simply are or they are not, and then can find these different tools to find some euphoria in their experience.
Unless these kids were lying to me, they were not made to stop. I can tell you that much.
Again, we don't know.
That's such a nuanced and complicated idea. And like I said, these two examples could be any great number of things. I'm just telling you one last time before we wrap up the call that people do not choose these identities. Maybe they choose to express themselves out of a misunderstanding of their own or an exploration of their own identity. Gender politics are complicated. There is a lot to be written. There's a lot that has been written about the complexities of gender, the social construct, and how it expresses itself biologically and in our language and in all of these other places. But I think we will find almost no common ground if we continue to look at a trans identity simply as a choice. That's the same type of rhetoric that it took us generations to get over with regards to homosexuality. And we have finally, as a society, largely gotten past that. And I am hoping that sometime in the next 10 years, we can be saying the same things about trans identities. But Jacob, I'm going to leave it there for now.
Yeah. Thanks for your call, Jacob. And thank you for being honest with us. We appreciate it.
Really do appreciate everything that you've shared. And I wish the best for these young people.
I mean, shit, we had these kinds of discussions about being left-handed a few hundred years ago, for goodness sake. But anyway, well, Christy, I'm going to hijack the show again.
Please.
Because I'm cool like that. There is a wonderful group of people, an amazing cadre of Cadillacs of humans, and they are our patrons. We literally couldn't do what we do without them. If you want to join their ranks, I would thoroughly encourage you to go to tiny.cc/PatreonTH and give what you can, if you can. And if you do, you may end up on our weekly list of our top patrons. So, starting off at the top, we have number 1, Dingleberry Jackson. Always love that name. Number 2, Oops, All Singularity. Number 3, Davor Valjean. Number 4, Kalevi Helvetti. Number 5, Left in the Leaves. And an honorable mention for Benjamin Trapp. Thank you very much for your contributions. Really do appreciate it. And again, if you want to get in on that, tiny.cc/PatreonTH. And we've had another super chat from Puck Tholinda for, I believe, 50 Swedish krona. I have never met a trans person who isn't empathetic and welcoming of detransitioners. What we don't like are the lies the gender critical spread.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's a great point. All right. Well, before we wrap up, I want to remind everybody the question for the week this week is, what was God really doing on his day of rest? You can reply in the comments and tune at the beginning of next week's episode. And real quickly, I want to bring back in our wonderful producer, leader, co-host, backup, good friend, Richard Gilliver, for helping us out today. Richard, what'd you think of the show? What rankled you? What were you screaming into your unconnected, muted microphone about?
Oh, wow. I can say that, first of all, I think, actually, before I say that, I want to say that last caller, although I disagree with him, and although I think he was quite confused at some points, I think he was trying. I genuinely do think he was trying to understand, and I really appreciate that from him. I really, really do. And, just carry on trying to understand and having these conversations. They're really, really important. And the way you two guys spoke to him was fantastic. Talking about the way you spoke to people, the first caller, I don't know if you've noticed while you've been doing the show, the two hosts can see me in the green room while they're hosting. And
not these two hosts, just one of us can see you in the room. I see a vaguely Yorkshireman-shaped blur off in the corner of my screen, and that's about as much as you get out of me.
Maybe Jamie sensed me with the force. It is Father's Day after all. So I've been quite distracted, and that is because since the first caller went off air, I have received no less than 39 messages from him telling me how he was not given an opportunity to speak.
Wow. And, I thought you were going to say that as soon as he mentioned William Lane Craig, you were screaming into your microphone. I didn't know that there was follow-up from there.
Is a lot of the messages have been complaints. A lot of them have been because I objected to his some of the definitions he gave with language. And a lot of them were around that subject. He did give me one message, which was off both of those topics. And he said that the Western society was built by the army of God. And if you want to be secular, go and live with the barbarians in Asia. So I found interesting comment.
I'll be booking my flight to Japan soon, and you can all just stay here, and I'll enjoy. Yeah, it seems kind of fine over there. Actually, seems pretty good. Not too bad.
I do appreciate him calling, and I have invited him to call back next week when I'm hosting, because I do want to go through some of this linguistic stuff with him. I think he got some of the definitions for some of the Hebrew words quite wrong, so I have extended an invitation for him to call back. But yeah, it was it has distracted me somewhat from the show. From what I did catch when I wasn't being distracted, is I've really enjoyed it. An excellent show, and as always, and I thoroughly enjoy you two chaps hosting together.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for backing us up, and I guess fielding our mail and our hate mail in particular. So I'm gonna send a love ring your way, Richard. Anybody that you guys are sending love rings to today?
I'm sending them to all the dads out there, and all the mums who have to be dads, and all the dads who have to be moms, and all the dads that are moms, and all the dads that are dads, and and everything in between.
And I'd like to send some to people like the last caller who really do want to understand and are making those efforts to have those conversations. I really appreciate those calls. They're some of my favorite to kind of walk through things like that with people. So carry on doing what you're doing.
Well, quick reminder, if you want to receive our love directly to your eyes and ears, we'll be in the after show in the Discord.
Yeah, catch us at tiny.cc/ACD Discord. And then just remember, if you don't believe, this is your community, and we appreciate you being here. If you do believe, we don't hate you. We're just not convinced.
Oh.
We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Friday at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.